الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Dealing with fiqh during the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, and this is basically from the year 11 after Hijrah until the year 40, in which the fourth Khalifa Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu was murdered. And I believe it's become apparent how fiqh has started differing a little bit from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the sense, during the lifetime of Allah's Messenger alayhi salatu wassalam, the companions would usually refer to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and get a specific answer, But there were certain instances when they were far from the Messenger ﷺ, they did not have access to the person of the Prophet ﷺ. They had to use their own ijtihad and their own personal effort to arrive at the correct kind of ruling or conclusion. But after the passing of the Messenger ﷺ, we said the companions were faced with new situations. They had, for the first time, they're dealing with something like this. Second of all, some of these new situations were not specifically stated in the Quran or the Sunnah. So sometimes there were maybe a combination of two situations in one. And they have a ruling, they know a ruling from the Prophet ﷺ on this one, but not, and on that one, but these two rulings being put together, that was a new situation. How to deal with this? One of these examples of this, just to make it more tangible, and it's not something I would say the companions differed upon as far as I know, but I'm just saying this is a fiqh issue. You know, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited us from praying just before Maghrib, just before sunset. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited that, and he basically advised against praying just before sunset. And we also know that the Messenger ﷺ said, if one of you comes to the musalla or to the masjid, musalla here means masjid, they should not sit until they pray two rak'ah, which are called later on tahiyyatul masjid, the greeting of the masjid, the greeting of the prayer area. Now, if someone comes to the masjid just before Maghrib, 5 minutes before Maghrib, should they pray and then sit? Or should they sit without praying? Because now we have two situations. One, there's a prohibition of praying before Maghrib, just before Maghrib, let's say 15 minutes, around the last 15 minutes before Maghrib. And we also have an obligation that before you sit, you have to pray two rak'ah. So which one to follow? Now this is a situation where we have two situations being put together. How to deal with this? Should I follow this hadith, which says don't pray at this time? Okay, apart from the obligatory prayers, you missed Asr, you can pray it then. We're talking about a prayer that's not one of the mandatory prayers or not one of the 5 mandatory prayers. But you have another hadith that says, you can't sit in the masjid unless you pray 2 rak'ah. So which one should I follow now? This is a situation that's a mixture of two, and we have two seemingly conflicting instructions. How should we deal with such a situation? Okay, this is what I'm saying, or what I mean by there are new situations. There are new situations, combination of situations the companions had to deal with that they did not have a specific text on, or this newly arising situation consisted of more than one situation and each one of them took in a different direction. So the companions, generally speaking, were faced with new situations. They had to come up with conclusions. They had to use their understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah and what we can loosely call the philosophy of legislation. This is a very loose usage of the word. Okay, this is or basically the logic behind that seems to be, or the guidelines that seem to be running behind everything in Islam, in the legislation in Islam. So they need to use their understanding of that in order to arrive at new situations. Today's session is actually talking about these. is dedicated to talking about these newly arising situations and how the companions used ijtihad to deal with them. And interestingly enough, the companions have differed. They have arrived at different conclusions. Why did they arrive at different conclusions? That's one issue that we will deal with, inshallah. And the other issue that we will deal with, we will see how they handled this kind of differing. Did it lead to any clashes, any disagreements, any fights, any factionalism, right? Or any cults being created? Did it lead to that? Or was it a matter that was treated or that was handled with wisdom and balance and respect of both parties who were involved in this? In the book of Shaykh Abu Amina Bilal Phillips, like the chapter is quite small on this period about the companions. He talked about a few issues. And it's actually, as I said previously about his book, it's a good framing effort in the English literature, in the English language. We don't have so much literature talking about this subject, so it's a very good framing effort. It does set the frame for understanding how, or these subjects that we're dealing with. So it's a good foundational work on the subject. I will start by talking or sharing some examples from the companions and how they dealt with new issues. Prior to this, I've received a few research proposals. There's one sister who will be talking about ijtihad in general, and then she'll narrow down the point of her research to talk about, I believe, mortgage. Is that right? The sister is mortgage. Was it mortgage? The sister is going to talk about? Okay, mortgage, yes? Okay, good. So mortgage in today's world and Muslim minorities living in the Western world, how the scholars have dealt with in terms of ijtihad today. How did they assess the situation? Which is a very good way to narrow down the concept of ijtihad and take one example, one case in point, and see how it's been dealt with today. Brother Ahmed Abdi here has come up with three very interesting, I actually like his choice of topics. Just to share with you, just to give you some kind of taste of how others think. His first topic was deny, disprove, disregard the issue with social media in Islam. And I think he goes down in the description a bit more precisely about how Muslims are dealing with their differences today, sometimes accusing others who disagree with them of maybe watering down Islam or not dealing with it right. So I think it's a very good choice, and I think you're heading towards that, yeah? You're leaning towards more towards that. The second one was, and I think it could be included in the first one to a certain extent, a rise of Islamic intelligence, breaking free from cultural norms. And I think this is a very good topic. But it could be included in how we handle the first one. So it could be there. The third one was the best examples to follow obtaining understanding through the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. And also, I think if Brother Ahmed writes on the first point or the first proposal, I think he can reveal a lot of this indirectly, in an indirect fashion. So very good choice. Okay, we have Brother Muhammad Jabir, and okay, very good. Very good. I'm just seeing it for the first time, and it's about the issue of halal meat and the issue of slaughter, which is needed. We need that kind of insight. We need to see what the scholars have how they have differed, the scholars of today, how they have differed about this, and how it should be handled. How it should be handled. So at least, okay, even if there's a disagreement, we see how we can handle it wisely without compromising our Islamic principles and without compromising on our sense of brotherhood. Excellent. So good. I'm very happy with this. I think Brother Muhammad as well from the media said that he will research the issue of the beard and how the scholars have differed about this throughout the ages. So it's more about growing the beard, the obligation of growing the beard. What are the texts there? What are the different opinions? Where do they come from? What are their foundations? What are the premises they are standing on? And the issue of the length of the beard, how it was handled by the scholars. So we see, is there a genuine difference there, or is it just an insignificant kind of difference. That's a big research, but it's very much needed as well. Anyone thinking, let's just see, no commitment, but anyone thinking of something and they haven't really put it? Yeah, your research is actually, I think it's a very interesting, it's a bit broad.
I want to
Narrow it down. Okay, which is very good, is actually using the some of the principles we mentioned, or the guidelines that we find in Islam, which is about minimizing difficulty, which is also about removing hardship. So the brother's using them more within a professional, administrative, managerial, context, which is a very interesting. To me, I find this very interesting. So, how narrow did you go?
Yeah,
How specific?
actually arose last week. The situation here in Canada and for extended back to my homeland, Sri Lanka,
Yes.
about the issue of using for education, using props and artifacts and statues like mannequins and whatever things purely for the purpose of education, not for the purpose of worship.
Yes.
So this is something to do along the lines of why Muslim extremists go and destroy the Bamiyan statues like the Taliban did.
Yes.
It's something to do with that. It's raised a whole lot of problems.
So you changed the issue a little?
No, so I want to apply this framework discussing that fifth issue.
Okay, so you want to use that general framework to discuss that issue. Okay, but remember something. We're not here in a class of fiqh. We're not arriving at fiqh conclusions because honestly we're not qualified. But all of these points, we're studying how the scholars are dealing with things, okay? So it's not for me or for you. And you will see even when I talk about the differences among the companions, we will not arrive at a conclusion which is correct, which is incorrect. We will not arrive at this. We will just mention the difference between, because that's our class. Our class is not a fiqhi. We're not talking about fiqh issues, trying to arrive at a conclusion, what's the right ruling here. That's not our class. That's beyond the scope of this class.
So how should I interpret it? Just discuss the issues around it?
I don't want to be, I don't want to control, your choice. So I think your starting point was about seeing the guidelines of Islam, which is removal of difficulty, bringing ease, achieving, for example, justice, things like that, these great principles. If you still want to see how, probably take one of them and see, I'm not sure. I don't want it to be my own research. But, the issue of talking about using Melican, what are they called? I'm using my Arabic now. The props, yeah. For, different purposes, regardless, in education or in marketing, etc. And how this, probably if you want to do it this way, you want to see how the scholars have differed of today. Because obviously it's a new issue. See how the scholars differed about that. Maybe you also want to see how cartoons, because that's an interesting topic. Cartoons, if using cartoons or animation for purposes of education, purposes of raising awareness about important issues, okay, because there's an issue with, making images, generally speaking, drawings. So you want to see how the scholars have differed of today, how they have differed about this. Good. So you highlight the difference, and you see, where these scholars are coming from and where these scholars are coming from.
But can I sort of do it within the framework of that one of the analyses I've done there?
Yes, sure, you can use these principles, absolutely. You want to look at this in the light of these principles. But it's not for you or me to arrive at a conclusion. Okay, we leave that for the scholars there. Okay, good. Now it's sort of back on track, inshallah, mashallah. Yes.
So, are you referring to researching already founded fiqh opinions and their bases and just going to different madahib or shuyukh of the past and present and kind of bringing together all of the different opinions?
The way to answer this question is to look at the scope of our class. Our class is more about seeing how fiqh developed, the story of fiqh, the history of legislation. So for us, We saw how it was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Now we're having a look at how it was at the time of the companions. Then slowly we'll move on now to the tabi'een and then the madahib, the four madahib, and how it developed, and then afterwards. So
like I have a topic, for example, if the thought that came to my mind was dealing with the opposite gender in the workplace and in the school system. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, based
Very
on
good.
what you just suggested, how did the Prophet
exactly. The issue of mixing between the genders, two genders,
Mixing, basically.
okay, how it was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, how it was later on,
Okay.
and how is it seen today? What are the scholars saying? What are the different opinions? Okay?
So then, and then throughout the ages, and then now.
Exactly.
Kind of report. Got it.
Exactly. May Allah make it easy for you. I'm not sure how many references you will find, but it's a very good. This is what we want, is we want to see what we're going through as Muslims today and see what's the reason behind the differences. Because oftentimes there's a lot of name calling, there's a lot of accusations on both sides. Oh, you guys are living in the old times, and some people say, oh, you're coming up with a progressive Islam. So we want to see how true these are, and is there room for differences, or is it just a violation? So it's good to broaden our perspective and see where whoever is talking about these issues are coming from. Okay, so when there's a legitimate kind of difference, we respect that. But when there is a difference that's completely off the mark, okay, we know that this actually has no proper foundations. So it's good to see where people are coming from. So we recognize what's a good, legitimate difference and what is a difference that's based on just desires or some kind of external influence, and it's in violation to the texts and to the general guidelines that we find within Islam. Okay, more ideas?
Can we get simple topics? Like that's very complex, right? The whole gender mixing issue. That is, I guess you could say it's.
Mixing is not really a wide topic. It's quite a narrow topic. It's quite a narrow topic, yeah.
It's like, for example, you use the example of the beard, right? It's a very specific, kind of. Not
Yes, the beard is very specific, but may Allah make it easy for the brother. There's a whole lot of literature that he will have to go through. So it's quite a bit of literature review, which is reading, a lot of reading to do.
I guess a similar one would be the isbal.
If someone wants to take the isbal, that's a very good thing as well. That's because it's a common reason for a lot of criticism and fights. So someone could take this. Another issue that I could throw some ideas on you. Anyone who finds them interesting, they can probably. The issue of tashabbuh, resembling the non-Muslims. Tashabbuh. What does it really mean? What did the scholars say about it? What does the Arabic language say about this? How was it at the time of the Prophet ﷺ? How was it at later times? Okay, because you will find sometimes people say, okay, someone is wearing he's dressed up like the non-Muslims. But is this a legitimate kind of naming? Is it a title, a real title, or is it just a personal opinion? So that's a good thing. That's a good thing to look into. The issue of isbal. Obviously, the issue of isbal for sisters could be the issue of the face, the niqab, etc. What's the difference? Because there's a huge difference among the scholars about this. What does it mean? In a Western context, where Muslims live as a minority. So these are pressing issues. Maybe someone wants to look at, being engaged politically. Being engaged politically, is that, how far can we go with this? Is it legitimate, illegitimate? Okay, where do the scholars come from with regards to this? How do they discuss this? Okay, let's start with the differences that took place among the companions. One example is a pregnant woman whose husband passed away. She has a waiting period before she is allowed to get married. Any woman whose husband passes away, she's given a waiting period, which is called in Arabic iddah. She is supposed to wait until that waiting period is over, then she is able to receive proposals or seek marriage. Prior to that, during this waiting period, she is not allowed to receive proposals or seek proposals. She's not allowed, and she's meant to even like limit her socialization to a minimum. So if a pregnant woman whose husband passes away, there's a difference among the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. For example, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu and Abdullah bin Mas'ud, they had the opinion that as soon as she gives birth, her waiting period is over. So let's say a woman was in her 9th month of pregnancy. Her husband passes away. 10 days later, she gives birth. So her waiting period was 10 days. Is she allowed to seek marriage after these 10 days, after birth, or not? According to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu and Abdullah bin Mas'ud and some other companions, it was this, because the verse says, وَأُولَاتُ الْأَحْمَالِ أَجَلُهُنَّ أَن يَضَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ in Surah Al-Talaq. وَأُولَاتُ الْأَحْمَالِ أَجَلُهُنَّ أَن يَضَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ. And the pregnant women, their iddah, their waiting period, is when they give birth. It ends by them giving birth. That's the end of their waiting period. This is in Surah Al-Talaq. Surah Al-Talaq used to be called by Abdullah bin Mas'ud Surah Al-Nisa Al-Sughra. He used to call it the Surah of women, the smaller or the shorter Surah of women. That's Abdullah bin Mas'ud's name. And he also used to call another surah, Surah Al-Nisa Al-Kubra. Surah Al-Nisa Al-Kubra. Anyone knows which surah he's talking about? The surah of women, the biggest surah of women. No, Al-Baqarah. Abdullah Mas'ud has a special, sometimes terminology, sometimes, because there's a lot of rulings that pertain to women that were discussed also in Surah Al-Baqarah. A lot of issues about divorce and about other issues, marital issues. However, Ali radiyallahu anhu and Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, they considered the iddah of the pregnant woman, the waiting period of the pregnant woman, would be the longest of the two types of iddah. Because ideally, a woman, the waiting period of a divorced woman would be, a woman whose husband dies, 4 months and 10 days. 4 months and 10 days. That's how many days? 130 days, right? Roughly. 130 days. So, أربعة أشهر وعشرة. والذين يتوفون منكم ويذرون أزواجا يتربصن بأنفسهن أربعة أشهر وعشرة. Those among you who die and they leave behind them a wife. This wife waits in that waiting period for 4 months and 10 days. That's in Surah Al-Baqarah. Surah Al-Baqarah. According to Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Surah Al-Nisa Al-Kubra. Okay. So Ali and Ibn Abbas, Ali radiallahu anhu and Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, they say, no, she waits, she has two options. There are two iddas here. Either when she gives birth, her waiting period is over, or these 130 days, or which is 4 months and 10 days. So they're saying it's the longest of these two periods. She has to wait for the longest of these two periods. The longest, أبعد الأجلين. She has to wait. So they say it's not when she gives birth. No, she has to wait in that waiting period in her iddah for the longest of these two periods. So let's say she was in her 9th month of pregnancy. She gave birth 10 days after the death of her husband. Is her iddah over? According to Ali ibn Abi Talib and Ibn Abbas, no. She has to wait 4 months, 10 days. Let's say she was in the 2nd month of pregnancy and her husband dies. How long does she wait? Until she gives birth, which is most likely will be longer than the 4 months and 10 days. So that's their opinion. They have differed. Both of them differed. Now we're not going to say which is more correct, because there are scholars who are backing this, scholars who are backing this. But we see this difference was among the companions. It did not cause them to fight. It did not cause them to say, you're destroying the religion of Allah. It did not cause them to say, you're wrong, I'm right. None of this was there. There was respect. There was respect. Okay. However, there's a hadith, authentic hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, where there was a woman called Subay'ah, whose husband passed away, and she gave birth a few days later. And the Prophet ﷺ allowed her to seek marriage. Allowed her to seek marriage. That solves the problem. Someone might say, so why didn't Ali radiallahu anhu, Al-Abbas radiallahu anhu, why didn't they change their opinion? It seems they did not, this hadith did not reach them. Probably, that was the reason. Or at least maybe reach them, but not through a way or a narration that they could trust. Or maybe they thought it was a specific ruling for that woman. There are so many different interpretations. But, okay, so we see the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, or the action, the way the Prophet ﷺ dealt with a specific issue like this, actually is in line or agrees with the opinion of Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu and Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. Another example. A woman who is divorced, her husband divorces her. He says, you're divorced. You're divorced. So she has her waiting period, her iddah, which is, she's not pregnant. How long is the period? 3 quru. Quru is an Arabic word, okay? Is an Arabic word. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوء in Surah Al-Baqarah. And women who are divorced, they remain in their iddah, they wait in their iddah for 3 quru. We said, what's quru in the Arabic language? It's plural of qur. One of them is qur. What is qur? It has 2 meanings. It means the period of menses for the woman, but it also has another meaning. The period when a woman is clear of her menses, period. The opposite meaning for the same word. How do we know? Usually Arabs know from the context. From the context. Can you think of an English word that actually has a similar kind of double meaning, completely opposite meanings? But it depends on the context, you can interpret it. If you think of an example, share it with me.
You think that manipulate could kind of, because manipulate could be a positive thing and it could be a bad thing.
Yes.
You could manipulate things in a positive way and you could manipulate things in a negative way.
Very good. Very good. Manipulate, for example, is used in science. You manipulate by changing certain conditions. So that's more of a neutral, let's say, more of a neutral. But there's usually, obviously manipulation and it has this negative connotation. But still doesn't show 2 opposite denotations.
In our slang, I guess depending on which generation
Yes.
you're from, the word sick.
Sick, yeah.
You know, a kid would say, that's sick. So that generally means
That's
very
great,
good. Yeah.
beautiful, yeah.
Obviously in English, sick means
Yeah, very good. That's a good example, yeah. That's sick, yeah. It could, show admiration, you like this thing, or could show that you're really like disgusted. It's good. Good. Yeah, okay. So the word qur could mean either the menses of the woman or the period when she is clear of her menses. So this is why we have Umar ibn Khattab again and Abdullah bin Mas'ud have the same opinion, that a woman who's divorced, her iddah, her waiting period ends when she takes her bath after the third menses she goes through. Like, she's divorced, she counts 3 menstrual cycles. After she comes out of her third menstrual cycle and she takes a bath, that's when her iddah is over. It's complete. But Zayd ibn Thabit radiyallahu anhu, he says no. As soon as she enters her third menstrual cycle, that's when the iddah is over. Because for him, it's the time when she's clear of her menses. That's what qur is. 3 qur. So that's a difference among the companions. Is this issue been disputed? Has it been settled, this dispute? No. You have scholars here, you have scholars there. So the first one, we have a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that settles the issue, generally speaking. But here, nothing specific. A third example. Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu and Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, this is in issues of inheritance. They said the grandfather from the maternal side, from the paternal side, from the father's side. The grandfather, he blocks the brothers from inheriting. Someone passes away, his grandfather, his paternal grandfather is alive, and his brothers are alive. Abu Bakr and Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhum, they say that the grandfather blocks the brothers from inheritance, so they don't get a share. They don't get a share. He blocks them. However, Zayd ibn Thabit, on the other hand, has the opinion that no, both the grandfather and the brothers inherit, because they are all at the same level of relation to the deceased. The same level of relation to the deceased. How is this? According to Zayd bin Thabit, the grandfather is connected to the deceased through the father, right? He's the father of the father. So the one in between is the father. And the brothers, they're also connected to the deceased through the father. And it's always the same level of relation on both sides. So all of them inherit. All of them share or take a share from the inheritance. That's the difference among the companions and rules of inheritance. A fourth example. A woman passes away, she leaves a wealth behind, and her husband is alive and her parents are alive. Her husband is alive and her parents are alive. How is the inheritance distributed? According to Ibn Abbas, the husband gets, as in Surah An-Nisa, half, because he's not married. They don't have children. They say they don't have children. The husband gets half of her wealth in inheritance. He inherits half of her wealth. The mother takes a third, and the father takes the rest. Whatever remains. Zayd bin Thabit and most of the other companions take another opinion. They say the husband gets the half. That's stated in the Quran, there's no difference about this. After the husband takes the half, we take the remaining half. The mother takes a third of it. See the difference? Ibn Abbas's opinion, the husband takes half and the mother takes a third. and whatever remains is for the father. Ibn Abbas applies the third after the husband, not on the whole amount, but on the half, the remaining half. See the difference? So Ibn Abbas applied the third of the mother before the husband takes before the husband takes half. He applies the third to the full amount. Let's say she left behind $9,000. According to Ibn Abbas, the husband takes half, which is 4,500. The mother takes a third of the 9,000, which is 3,000, and the father takes the rest. The father takes the rest, which remains as here 1,500. According to Zayd ibn Thabit and most of the other companions, they say no, the husband takes a half. So what do we have? 4,500 remaining. The mother takes a third of this. A third of the 4,500. A third of it would be what? 1,500. Then the father takes the remaining, which is 2/3, will be 2/3 of that, which will be basically 3,000. And they are saying, because here the verse applies لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. For the male is double the share of the female. Okay, this disagreement has been there among the companions. Another example. There was an incident during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab where a woman was in her waiting period after the divorce. She was divorced. In her waiting period, okay, before it ended, she got married, which is haram. She has to wait until the iddah is over. She did not wait. During her iddah, she got married. She found a husband, she got married. So according to Ali ibn Abi Talib, what's the ruling in this? He said no, she should be separated from her new husband and she should wait until the iddah is over, and then if they want to marry, they can marry. Umar ibn al-Khattab said no. If she marries a person in her waiting period, this person becomes haram for her for good, as a punishment. As a punishment. Clear? So if a woman does not wait until her iddah or waiting period is completely over and she gets married, Ali ibn Abi Talib said, no, they should be separated because that's haram. And then when her iddah is over, if he wants to propose to her, marry her, fine. That's it. Still things as they are. But Umar al-Khattab said no, because she violated this right or this obligation that she should respect her waiting period. Then we make this man haram for her as long as she lives and he lives. They can never get married again because they violated here the legislation. Another example. There is something called ila in the Arabic language. And that's basically when a husband does not approach his wife. He doesn't make any statement. He just doesn't approach his wife. Physically. He doesn't approach her. What does Islam do about this? A woman is just left hanging. Her husband is not approaching her physically. She has, as a human being, she has needs and these rights have to be fulfilled. He's not doing this. So the Quran mentions وَالَّذِينَ لِلَّذِينَ يُؤْلُونَ مِن نِسَائِهِمْ تَرَبُّصُ أَرْبَعَةِ أَشْهُرٍ. For those who make ila, basically they don't approach their wives for 4 months. If they don't do this, then they have to make their stance clear. Do they want to keep them as wives and give them their rights, or do they want to divorce them? They have to make a decision there. You can't keep this woman hanging. She has rights. The scholars have differed how this is played out in reality. So we have Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. He says, if a husband does not approach his wife for 4 months, and that's basically without an excuse, okay? He's not approaching her, choosing not to approach her. And the 4 months are complete, are over, without him approaching her during this period or coming back to her, then she's automatically divorced from him. They're completely separate. They're automatically separated. That's it. So if he wants to marry, if he wants to, come back to her, he has to initiate a new marriage proposal. He has to initiate a new marriage proposal. That's Abdullah bin Mas'ud. But the majority of the companions, of the fuqaha, or the scholars among the companions, they say, no, he has to be notified. It's been 4 months, you have not approached your wife. Who notifies him? It's the judge, the court. They notify him, you have not given your wife her rights 4 months, now you have to make a stance. You either keep her as a wife, give her her rights, or you have to divorce her and free her. This is the opinion of most of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another example that I mentioned last time, but there's no harm mentioning it again. We know that divorce, if a man divorces his wife first time, she has to be in her waiting period. If he asks her back, or he returns to her during this period, waiting period, okay, then normally husband and wife, normal couple, back to their marital life. But one divorce, instance of divorce counts. If he does this another time, still, and he returns to her during her waiting period, that's a second divorce, counts, and they're back to normal life, marital life. If he divorces her a third time after these 2 times, what happens? She has to keep in her iddah, waiting period, but he cannot return her back. That's it. They're divorced. He cannot have her back. He cannot have her back. She has to wait for her waiting period or iddah, which is three quru, either menses or either clean periods. Now the difference or the differing among the companions was after this third divorce, instance of divorce, does she have the rights that her husband provides for her accommodation and basic expenses, or not? Or not? Huh? After what? Yes, the irrevocable divorce, the third one, that's it. After that, is the husband obligated to provide for her accommodation and her food and her clothes, her basic needs? Is he obligated to provide for that? Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu says, yes, the husband has to provide for her during her waiting period until she's completely free. And he takes the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن in Surah Al-Talaq, the surah, chapter of divorce. لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن ولا يخرجن إلا أن يأتين بفاحشة مبينة. Do not push them out of their houses, out of their home. What does that mean? It's your home as the husband who owns the house. Because you are supposed to provide accommodation, house. So do not get them out of the house. Don't get them to leave the house. And they should not leave unless they commit something that's a grave, act, a very grave act. So Umar al-Khattab says, yes, he has to provide her with accommodation and the basic needs, cover her expenses. But most of the other companions, they say no. They say no. There is no obligation, because now they say this pertains to the first 2 instances of divorce before reaching the third irrevocable divorce. The first 2 instances of divorce, this is where this verse applies, because he can return to her. He can bring her back. And it's more likely that he will bring her back if he keeps her in the house. And she's there in his presence, they're more likely to come back to each other. But now with the irrevocable divorce, No, there's no chances of them coming back. There's no chances of them coming back. So this doesn't apply. Umar ibn Khattab, we said that when he took this opinion, there was a woman, Fatima bint Qais, she came to him and she said the Prophet ﷺ, that was her case, she was divorced 3 times. After the 3rd time, the Prophet ﷺ said, no, your husband now, or your ex-husband, doesn't have to provide for your accommodation or your expenses. Does not have to provide for that. So she came and told Umar ibn Khattab. Umar ibn Khattab said, لا أترك قول ربنا عز وجل لقول امرأة لا ندري أحفظت أم نسيت. He says, I'm not going to leave a verse that is so clear, the verse we just recited. I'm not going to leave that ruling for a woman who's coming up with a narration, but I'm not sure whether she remembers well or not. And as we said, Umar al-Khattab here is not rejecting a hadith, but he was not convinced, along with how the whole context for him, according to his personal assessment, he thought the woman did not remember quite well, or she did not really, that her case did not apply to what he was talking about. Did anyone turn off the lights? I'm not sure, is it? Huh? Automatically. Someone has to move around, sisters, so that turns on. Technology. Sisters were so quiet that the lights went off. Okay. Yes.
It's kind of related to what you were just saying right now. Is there any obligation or any ruling in the Quran that says that if a mother and father are divorced, that the father should continue providing for their children until, of course, they're able to go out on their own?
The father has to provide by default, regardless whether he and the mother were separated, split or not. As long as the child cannot provide for him or herself, which, that differs from one culture to the other, one country to the other, then the father has to provide for them. He has to provide for them. It's his responsibility. It's his responsibility. That's it. Yeah. Okay. I think 5 minutes for the prayer. We'll give time for you, inshallah, those who want to make wudu, those who want to use the washroom so after salah, inshallah, let's say around 8:15, 8:20, come back as soon as possible, so inshallah we make good use of our time. We'll carry on with some issues where the companions differed about, and then we will try to finalize a little bit with the time of the companions. So hopefully, inshallah, this will not be a complete closing of the time of the companions or the Khulafa al-Rashidin, because I want to talk a little bit about the personality of Umar ibn Khattab and his fiqh, generally speaking, as a very clear example of how fiqh was during the times of the Khulafa al-Rashidun. So we might need a little bit of time next week, inshallah, just to finalize that period or that stage of the fiqh, and then inshallah probably next week as well we'll move on to the stage of a tabi'een and the pre-madhahib period, maybe the early development of the madhahibs or the madhabs era. More examples of the differences or the differing among the companions was, we said, I believe we mentioned this last time, that if a woman gets married, like the nikah is made between a man and a woman, before naming a specific amount of mahar or dowry. So it's not been specified. It's not been specified. Obviously there's an initial agreement, there will be a dowry, but it's not been specified. And this man passes away before the marriage is consummated. So Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu said his fatwa was that she gets, from the inheritance of this man, she gets the value, that's her dowry, that is similar to the average woman of her time and her locality. لها مهر مثلها. So a woman her age in similar conditions, how much in average she usually takes as dowry. So she takes this from the inheritance, whatever this person leaves behind, before this inheritance is being distributed and split. Ali radiallahu anhu, he says she gets nothing. Ali radiallahu anhu, his fatwa was she gets nothing. She gets nothing. Another example of differing among the companions was Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. There was something that's called al-ata. Al-ata was basically a specific amount given from the Muslim government to every Muslim individual. Every Muslim individual would get al-ata from the Muslim government. What is al-ata? It's a yearly amount of money that's given from the Muslim Bayt al-Mal, from the treasury of the Muslim government, to every citizen. At the beginning it was every household, every person who was responsible for a household. And then Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, later on, he said, inshallah, if like things get better for the Muslim treasury or Bayt al-Mal, each child will get similar to what his father gets. So each individual will be getting something. Not only household, but it's like a yearly benefit. You want to call it welfare, but it wasn't like a welfare really, because regardless of your financial situation, you were given that. Regardless of the financial situation, the person was given that as a yearly amount from Bayt al-Mal. Abu Bakr's style in giving this was to give each person similar amounts. Each person similar amount. For example, it was like, let's say, 3,000 dirham or dinar every year, 3,000 dinar to everyone, 3,000 dinar. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he became the Khalifa, he said no. He said, كيف أجعل من حارب مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وترك أهله وماله كمن حارب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. How can I make someone who fought with the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, they abandoned their family, they abandoned their house, they abandoned their wealth, they left it behind, and they fought alongside the Prophet ﷺ, how can I give them the same amount like someone who fought against the Prophet ﷺ and later on became Muslim? How can I make them the same? So he said no. So he gave, for example, the people who took part in the Battle of Badr, the early Muslims, he gave each one of them 5,000 dinar a year. The early Muslims who did not fight in the Battle of Badr, he gave them 4,000. And others, he gave them 3,000. So the people who embraced Islam earlier, the people who contributed to Islam more, people who sacrificed more, they were given more from the government in accordance with their sacrifice and their contribution. Abu Bakr, when he was asked previously, why don't you give like some people more because of their contribution, etc., he said, al-ata, this kind of share given by the government, by the Muslim government, by Bayt al-Mal, was basically to help people sustain themselves. It's not a reward for what they did for the sake of Allah. So it's Allah who rewards them. I give them a provision, that's it. Umar al-Khattab had a different logic. So there was a difference. That's a huge difference, isn't it? A huge difference. So these were the companions, differences between the companions. Did Umar al-Khattab say Abu Bakr was wrong? No. That was his ijtihad, he fulfilled his. He followed his own ijtihad, his own understanding, his own assessment of the situation, and he was okay with Abu Bakr following his own assessment. You see what kind of spirit was among the companions dealing with these issues? This is why it's very important. This is why we're spending a bit more time here with the companions to see. That we're seeing a lot of differences among them. When you make Umrah, it's we say it's sunnah to make a ramal or ramal, depending, which is basically during tawaf, the first few rounds that you actually sort of do it jogging. Now no one can do it because of the amount of people, right? It's so busy that you can't even do it. But even when there's when there's some space and there's enough room, it's recommended that people in the first three, right? Is it first 3 rounds? They actually make ramal, that you walk fast or you sort of doing some kind of jogging. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ, when they first made Umrah, when they came from Medina and they came to make Umrah, the Prophet ﷺ said, these are the people of Mecca, they're looking at you from the mountains, and they will say, these people, أنهكتهم حمى يثرب. Like there was sort of a disease or a fever that was known to Medina. These people have been consumed by this plague of Medina. So you will see them very weak, physically very weak. So the Prophet ﷺ said, show them the impression that we are physically strong. So the first 3 rounds, we sort of running. We do it running, perform it running. So Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said, this was just to show the mushrikeen that actually the Muslims have physical strength. Now there's no need for it, so don't do it, it's not recommended. That was Abdullah ibn Abbas' fatwa. But for most of the companions, they kept on doing it. They said it became a sunnah. It became a recommendation. So these are some of the differences. There were big issues, like there were differences among the companions over bigger issues. For example, some of the issues of ijtihad among the companions. There was a big issue of difference, and that's about the newly, Muslims expanded. Like the Muslim army was spreading around and they were conquering and opening new lands. Let's say, for example, Iraq. So what was the ruling over the new lands? What was the ruling? Originally, the ruling was, specifically even at the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, that these are considered to be spoils of war. So they were taken, and the spoils of war, how were they distributed? Anyone who's taking part in that army, in that military expedition, they would get 4/5. So 1/5 of the spoils of war was taken, for the Muslim government to use in the different areas, public issues, public expenditure, or for poor people, for all the other areas, or people who need, people in debt. One fifth was taken by the Muslim government. 4/5 were given to who? The people who were taking part in that military expedition, in that battle. Now that's quite a lot. 4/5. Umar ibn al-Khattab had a different perspective. He saw that these new areas like Iraq and what's known today as Iran and Ash-Sham, which is Jordan, Syria, Palestine, and even Egypt. So he saw these areas were becoming Muslim countries because the people were converting to Islam. People were converting, entering into Islam, seeing the beauty of Islam, entering into Islam. So Umar al-Khattab saw that these were actually lands where there was a lot of future for Islam. So he said, no. People taking part in the military expedition, they're not taking 4/5. It's the Muslim government that's taking that. So he gave them some share, but he said, we keep the lands in the hands of the original people of these lands. We're not confiscating these lands. We keep it with these people. We keep it with these people. But we sort of stipulate or institute some kind of kharaj, some kind of tax, kharaj, tax on these lands. A tax that does not overburden the original owners of these lands, but they pay this kind of tax to the Muslim government, so the Muslim government can administer the country based on this expenditure. So they have some kind of a treasury, some kind of public funds where the Muslim government can run, and they can pay people, hire people, and they can administer these lands. So he saw a future there. So some of the companions, specifically Bilal, radiallahu anhu, he said, you can't do this. So Umar al-Khattab said, Allahumma kfini sharra Bilal. Oh Allah, just make Bilal, keep him away from here. So Umar al-Khattab had an insight there. Can someone say Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu changed the legislation of Islam? He played with it? No. Because Umar al-Khattab was also supported by some other companions. So he saw a public benefit there, general benefit to everyone there. So he stipulated that. So he said these newly opened countries, they remain in the hands of their own people, and there is a tax or a kharaj that is reasonable, that's placed upon them, so that Muslims, the Muslim government will be able to efficiently run these countries and administer them and look after them and establish a proper kind of governance over these countries. So this was a very deep insight from Umar al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. Another issue that arose as a matter of disagreement among the companions, but later on it was settled. One who drinks alcohol, there was a punishment for them. What was the punishment? Is it in the Quran? 80 lashes. Is it in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? No. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, what was the punishment of people who were caught or who admitted and surrendered themselves and they had drank alcohol, not alcohol, khamr, because there's a slight difference, but later on we'll come to that inshallah. So they drank khamr. These people were punished. They were punished, but it was not lashes. It was any kind of physical punishment. It was some physical punishment. They were not lashed. But at the time of Umar al-Khattab, there was a lot of instances. So Umar al-Khattab decided, he gathered some of the companions. He said, what do you think? Let's, make it a very clear punishment. So sometimes they were punished there were different types of physical punishment that they were exposed to. Let's make it a one punishment that is set, that is fixed, and it's applied to all. Let's find it. So first, they came up with 40 lashes. 40 lashes. Then people were actually getting involved more into drinking khamr. So Umar al-Khattab asked the companions again. They said, the least of punishments that is known in terms of lashes, it's 80, which is the ones who slander, like the ones who accuse someone, a Muslim, a man or woman, of committing adultery without bringing the 4 witnesses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَجْلِدُوهُمْ ثَمَانِينَ جَلْدَةً. So, let them be punished by with 80 lashes. So this is the least. So let's fix it at 80 lashes. And it was fixed at 80 lashes and it remained like that. It remained like that. It remained like that. So that was at the time of Umar al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. One of the disagreements among the scholars or the companions was riba. Riba, there are 2 different types of riba. There's riba and nasi'ah. That was the one that was prohibited in the Quran. Riba and nasi'ah, the way it was known at their time was someone would come to you and borrow $1,000 for, let's say, 8 months. So that you pay them back as $1,000 8 months later. This was it. So the lender would come to you and would say, it's time to pay me now. You say, I can't pay it now. They would say, I'll give you more time, but this time you pay me more. For this extension. This is how riba, by the way, used to be in the early times. This is how it used to be. It did not start at the beginning, I'll give you $1,000, you pay to me like this. That wasn't known among the Arabs. Among the Arabs at that time, it was known as, I'll give it to you for, say, 8 months, 10 months, a year, and then you'll pay it back to me as it is. But usually the person would not be able to pay it back, so the person would say, I would give you an extension, another year, but this time it becomes 1,200, not 1,000. So that was the commonly riba, and that's riba nasi'ah. Because you give more extension of time, you add more money. You add more money. This was an agreed upon form of riba. This is riba that's mentioned in the Quran. So Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, there's another type of riba, which is riba al-fadl. Like I sell you gold for gold for gold. But I give you like 200 grams, you give me 250 grams. So they used to sell sometimes dates for dates. So your dates are 1 year old, my dates are fresh. So they say, okay, I'll give you, hypothetically speaking, of the old dates, 2 tons. You give me 2 tons of the old dates, I'll give you 1 ton of the fresh dates. That's riba al-fadl. So it hasn't to do with extension of period of time, but it has to do with sometimes the quality of things. So the Prophet, so Abdullah ibn Abbas said, no, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong. So I give you like 1 ton of dates, you give me 2 tons of dates. It's called riba al-fadl. Riba al-fadl. Okay? Abdullah ibn Abbas said there's nothing wrong with this. That's good. But later on, as Ibn Qudama says in his book Al-Mughni, Ibn Abbas, because most of the other companions did not agree with Ibn Abbas. Later on, Ibn Abbas agreed with the other companions and he changed his opinion. Because there's a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, it's actually in Sahih Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ said, الذهب بالذهب والفضة بالفضة والبر بالبر والتمر بالتمر والملح بالملح صاعا بصاع هاء بهاء. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ says, عمدا بمد مثلا بمثل. The Prophet ﷺ says, gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, dates for dates, should be similar amounts. You exchange them, similar amounts. So this was a disagreement, but then it was settled. So these are some of the issues. Last time we started mentioning what Shaykh Waliullah Dahlawi, what he said, the reasons for the differences among the companions. So let's go over them and see some of the examples that he mentions. The first reason why the companions would differ, he would say that a companion would hear a ruling on some issue or a fatwa from the Prophet ﷺ, but the other did not hear it. The other did not get to know it. So the other one made ijtihad. The other one did not hear about this hadith from the Prophet ﷺ or this fatwa from the Prophet ﷺ, so he made a hadith. So he mentions here the example of Abdullah bin Mas'ud. That Abdullah bin Mas'ud was asked about a woman whose husband passed away before consummating the marriage. They made the nikah, but they have not consummated the marriage yet. So the man passed away. And he had not specified the dowry or the mahar. So Abdullah bin Mas'ud says, لم أرى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقضي في ذلك. I haven't witnessed the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم make a judgment about this. So for a month they kept coming back to Abdullah bin Mas'ud and asking him about it. So if he could give an answer, he said, I have no answer. So he made an ijtihad and he said she gets the dowry of the average woman who's in a similar situation. And she has to wait the waiting period. Okay, and she has. So there was a companion called Ma'qil ibn Yasar. He says he heard about this. He came to Abdullah bin Mas'ud and he said, I witnessed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam making the similar judgment for a woman in a similar situation. Okay, so I witnessed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The woman the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a judgment or a fatwa for, her name was Barwa'. It's a strange name. Barwa' al-Aslamiyya radiyallahu anha. Her name was Barwa' bint Washiq. Barwa' bint Washiq al-Aslamiyya. So the companion who witnessed this was Ma'qil ibn Yasar radiyallahu anhu. So when Abdullah bin Mas'ud heard the hadith from Ma'qil bin Yasar, he made sajdat shukr, sujood of gratitude and thankfulness to Allah that his ijtihad conformed with the hadith or with the fatwa of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A second reason that Shaykh mentions here why the companions would sometimes disagree, he says أن يقع بينهما المناظرة ويظهر الحديث بالوجه الذي يقع به غالب الظن فيرجع عن اجتهاده إلى المسموع. He says basically sometimes a companion would not hear the hadith, so he would make an ijtihad from himself. So he would make an ijtihad from himself. And then later on, he hears of the hadith, so he abandons his opinion and he follows the hadith. So you will find sometimes a companion has two fatwas. They seem to be contradictory. But he used to make a fatwa before hearing the hadith, but then later on when he comes across the hadith, he changes his opinion. And he gives this famous example from Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, who basically used to think, "Man asbaha junuban fala sawma lahu." He said, if someone wakes up, okay, that Fajr adhan is called and this person is in a state of janaba, then he cannot fast. This person cannot fast. But later on, Aisha radiyallahu anha tells him that the Prophet ﷺ sometimes, the muadhin would call for Fajr and the Prophet ﷺ still in a state of janaba and he would fast. So Abu Hurairah changed his fatwa after that. A third reason, أن يبلغه الحديث ولكن لا على الوجه الذي يقع به غالب الظن فلم يترك اجتهاده بل طعن في الحديث. So a hadith reaches him, but he's not convinced that this hadith talks about this. Or he's not convinced about the person that he really or she really conveys the hadith properly. Just like the example of Umar ibn Khattab when he refused to take the hadith from Fatima bint Qais. You remember? The hadith, Umar ibn Khattab, where he refused to take the hadith of Fatima bint Qais about the woman who's divorced for the third time, the irrevocable divorce. Is the husband obligated to provide for her accommodation and her expenses? Fourth reason, he says, أن لا يصل إليه الحديث أصلا, that the hadith never reaches this companion. So he makes an ijtihad. And the example he mentions is Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu. Women used to ask him, like when we make ghusl, do we have to untie our hair? He says yes, because if you don't untie it, your ghusl is invalid. Because basically he wants the water to go through the hair and reach the scalp. So for him, it has to be untied and the water has to go through it. Then Aisha radiyallahu anha, when she heard about this, she says to Ibn Umar, Ya ajaban libni Umar. Later on, she hears, what's a strange fatwa? She says, Aisha radiyallahu anha, he commands people to untie their hair. Why doesn't he even command them to shave their hair? That's what Aisha radiyallahu anha said. She said, I used to make ghusl with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the same pot, from the same container. And all I would do is just, pour the water on my hair 3 times and just rub it through without untying the hair. So that was the fatwa from Aisha radiyallahu anha, which is from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Ibn Umar used to tell women, you have to untie your hair. Okay, some other reason that they would see the Prophet ﷺ do something. Some of them took it as an act of worship. Some of them took it as an act of habit. That something happened, by way of habit. By way of habit. Like something, the Prophet ﷺ, this is an issue called tahsib in al-Hajj. Tahsib. That after Nufra min Mina, coming from Mina, going to Mecca for tawaf, the Prophet ﷺ, on the way, he came to, or Nufra from Arafat to Mina, then to Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ came to Al-Abtah, an area called Al-Abtah, which is known as Al-Khayf. Today is also known as Al-Khayf, today. Khayf Bani Kinana. So the Prophet ﷺ came into that area and he slept a little, he took a nap there. He took a nap. So some of the companions, like Aisha radiallahu anha, Aisha and Ibn Umar, they said there's no specific ruling for this place. So there is no specific merit for this place that you come through this place and you take a nap there, or you spend some time of the night in this specific area in Khayf Bani Kinana. There's no specific, but it happened to be on the way of the Prophet ﷺ. So any other way you come from Arafat to Mina, okay, any place, that's fine. Whereas the Jumhur of the companions radiallahu anhum, they said no, this specific place is preferred because the Prophet ﷺ came there. Okay, so some companions would see an act from the Prophet ﷺ. Some of them thought it was by way of habit, or the Prophet ﷺ had to necessarily pass through some area. That was it. Some of them said no, this specific area had a merit. This is why the Prophet ﷺ specifically went through it. Okay, so there are other reasons mentioned. Some of them are not like, I'm not going to mention all of them because some of them are more of a bit repetitive. Sometimes a companion would forget. For example, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, اعتمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عمرة في رجب. He said the Prophet ﷺ performed Umrah in Rajab, in the month of Rajab. Aisha heard about this, she said no, he forgot. Ibn Umar forgot. The Prophet ﷺ did not make Umrah in Rajab. Okay, so a companion his memory could change about something. So he could make a mistake, either forget something or make a wrong connection, saying that the Prophet ﷺ made Umrah in Rajab when Aisha says no, he did not. But Ibn Umar, okay, she said he saha, he mixed things up. And sometimes misinterpreting what the Prophet ﷺ said. He mentioned as an example, he says, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu used to say that the deceased, when he's buried, if his family, if they weep over him, he will be punished. The deceased will be punished if his family weeps over him. So Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, that's not true. That's a mistake. That's a misunderstanding. And basically she says, where Ibn Umar got this mistakenly from is that the Prophet ﷺ passed by a Jewish woman, the grave of a Jewish woman, and her family was weeping over her grave. So the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّهُمْ يَبْكُونَ عَلَيْهَا وَإِنَّهَا تُعَذَّبُ فِي قَبْرِهَا. The Prophet ﷺ says, they are weeping over her and she is being punished in her grave. So Aisha is saying, Abdullah ibn Umar thought that the reason she is punished is because of the weeping of her family. But she's saying that's a misunderstanding. That's a misunderstanding. Is this clear? Okay. One of the reasons for the differences is that they might attribute the ruling to a different reason. Again, that's clarified by example. There was a janazah, a funeral that passed by the Prophet ﷺ. So the Messenger ﷺ stood up. The Messenger ﷺ stood up. So the companions said, the companions said, why did you stand up? It's a non-Muslim. Why do you stand up? It's a non-Muslim. And لَيْسَتْ لِمُسْلِمٍ. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَوَلَيْسَتْ رُوحًا. Another narration, أَوَلَيْسَتْ نَفْسًا. Is it not a soul? Is it not a human soul? So the Prophet ﷺ stood up. So some of the companions said the Prophet ﷺ stood up because of the enormity of death. لِهَيْبَةِ الْمَوْتِ. That's what they said. For the enormity of death. Death is a huge issue. So the Prophet ﷺ stood up. Some of the companions said, no, it's because it's a soul. It's a soul. So because the nafs, it has its own sanctity, the Prophet, because it's been taken away, the Prophet ﷺ stood up. So each companion interpreted the reason why the Prophet ﷺ stood up differently. Al-Dahlawi here mentions, actually another book he mentions, which is Hujjatul Baligha. He says some of the companions thought or attributed the reason why the Prophet ﷺ stood up because he did not want the body of a non-Muslim to be passing by him and it was in a height above his head. Some of the reviewers of his book, they said, now this is not known from the companions, but maybe he heard something, maybe, or maybe he came across a narration talking about Waliullah al-Dahlawi. Okay, but basically the point here is that the companions would see something from the Prophet ﷺ and they would find the illah, they would conclude that different illah, okay, different reason for that, and then they would link similar situations to the illah that they concluded. Okay. Okay, he mentions another reason as well, and he says sometimes it would be that they would make different analogies. So you would, let's see what examples he mentions. I think that. Okay, these examples need a bit of explanation, so I'll leave them for later anyway. But they could make different analogies, the companions. So, a newly arising issue, they would make an analogy or qiyas compared to something. They think, okay, they see similarities. Another companion would not see this similarity, so they would not agree with the previous opinion. That's it. They would not agree with this conclusion or with this analogy. So generally speaking, these are some of the reasons why the companions radiyallahu anhum differed, and some of the examples of their differences. Some examples of their differences. The point here is to see that the companions have differed, and they have come up with ijtihads, different conclusions. How did they deal with this? They respectfully disagreed. That's it. No reason to say, you know, oh, you are violating, you are rejecting a hadith, you are contradicting a verse. And so this spirit was not among them. This spirit was not among them. And something else we can conclude. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have made this religion very specific. This issue, okay, specific verse, specific hadith, and that's it, there would be no differences. So some of the scholars say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing, in a sense, He's testing human beings by means of making some rulings explicitly clear, while leaving some rulings, you know, okay, that could be here, that could be there. There's a wisdom by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He tests the people. He tests the people. Another reason could be even bringing ease to people. Bringing ease to people. And this is why, for example, Al-Mansur, Khalifa Al-Mansur Al-Abbasi, he wanted to take Al-Muwatta of Imam Malik and make it the constitution for all Muslims. Imam Malik refused. He said, you can't, you know, force all people to follow one opinion, which is basically my own understanding and my own collection of hadith. You can't do this. So he refused. So that shows differences give space sometimes to human beings. And this is why the scholars in Usul al-Fiqh, when they talk about al-Mufti and al-Mustafti, they say sometimes a scholar has an opinion, and this opinion is strict, and that's the opinion that he sees to be true. And he knows there are other opinions that are more or that are easier. They are easier. But he does not see them to be true. But someone comes to him and asks him about this situation, but this person cannot. This person is like, it's difficult for him to apply the ruling that the Shaykh holds. So the Shaykh can give him the concession. And I'm going to think of an example that might help you understand this situation. A Shaykh might, a scholar might have the opinion that traveling has to be the distance that has been calculated today as 82 kilometers. 82 kilometers. Okay? But there is someone who travels that distance, but this person is an elderly. He's old. And this person, he travels for work. He's an old person and he's forgetful. And if you give him a couple of tasks, he loses his mind and his focus. And he travels very frequently a distance of 60 kilometers. 60 kilometers. He travels that distance. And if he was not to combine the prayer, especially in winter, oftentimes he would miss one of the prayers. You know, being focused on his business and with the travel and whatever stress and hassle that comes with traveling, usually he would miss on one of the prayers. Like for example, miss Dhuhr, and so on and so forth. So if the mufti or the sheikh sees, and the scholar sees that this person is really going through so much trouble, okay, he does not apply the ruling that he holds for himself, but he knows that other scholars say you are considered to be in a state of travel if it's 50 kilometers. So he could give that concession to that person. He could give that concession to that person. So basically this kind of difference among the scholars allows and brings about some ease for the Muslims. Some ease for the Muslims. And by the way, instances of this are very common in the books of fiqh. So the Shaykh would usually see the state of that person, the conditions of that person, and sometimes they would give them a concession that they would not give to themselves. They would not give to themselves. So, and for example, one of the famous examples is in the Hanafi madhab, generally speaking, a woman can get married without a wali, without a guardian. Generally speaking, in the Hanafi madhab, that's the ruling. So when someone who's Hanafi, like a woman who's Hanafi, and she got married according to the Hanafi madhab, she comes to a Shafi'i sheikh and she asks him about something or some need, he gives her a fatwa based on her own madhab. He doesn't force his own madhab on her. That's very common. Because if he were to force his own madhab on her, he would say your marriage is null and void. But sometimes there are issues about divorce, etc. that they have to deal with, so he accepts that. So he gives her the concession that's in her own madhab. So this is something that was common among the scholars, to see how they would respect that difference, accommodate it, and utilize it in a way that would help people, you know, in their affairs, and help them apply the ruling, and stay within the boundaries of Islam, instead of placing hardship upon other people. And they would not accuse other scholars of violating the Sharia, and so on and so forth. So I hope by this, inshallah, we've seen and we have come to really develop a good idea of how fiqh looked like at the time of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. One of the, and I would conclude with this, because I saw Muhammad and this just popped in my head. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu as well, they would sometimes hold their beard, especially when they make, ihlal from their ihram, when they broke their ihram state, shaving their head or shortening their hair, so shaving. Abdullah ibn Umar would hold on his beard as one fist, and he would trim whatever was more than one fist. Abu Hurairah would do the same. Some companions said, you can't do this. But Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu kept doing this. Abu Hurairah kept doing this. There's probably 6 companions who used to do this, who were reported to have done this. Okay, so this was, some companions said, no, you have to leave it, you can't touch it. Abdullah ibn Umar would do it. And who's the one who narrated most of the hadith of the beard was Abdullah ibn Umar and Abu Hurairah themselves, about leaving the beard. Okay, so that pertains to your research. Okay, so I believe now, alhamdulillah, we've developed a good idea of how fiqh was at the time of the companions. There was differences, and you see how Aisha radiallahu anha say, غفر الله ibn Umar, رحم الله ibn Umar, or Aba Abdul Rahman. May Allah have mercy of Abdul Rahman. When she disagreed with him about certain things, she would not say, oh no, he's wrong, he's making up things, he doesn't know. She doesn't say this. So this issue, Umar al-Khattab did not say Abu Bakr was doing it wrong, I'm doing it right. None of this. So the companions, were accommodating. So that shows you how the nature of fiqh should be. How the nature of fiqh should be. And don't forget, remember that fiqh is the human effort to arrive at the sharia, which is the ideal ruling. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really, what's the true ruling from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So hopefully this is a clear idea. Inshallah, next time, as we said, we might focus a little bit on Umar ibn Khattab as a very, very clear example of how fiqh was at the time of the companions. And then inshallah, hopefully we will move into seeing how fiqh was during the life of a tabi'een, meaning sigar al-sahaba, like the younger ones among the companions, later companions, and a tabi'een, and start building, inshallah, our understanding or the context for the madahib. See how fiqh developed during those times. Jazakumullah khairan for your patience and attendance. And as I said, think of, inshallah, a research topic. You will see it's quite enriching. I don't want it to be a burden. I want it to be something you have an interest in. So inshallah, it helps you have a better taste of fiqh. This is not something that's going to make you a mufti or a faqih or anything. No, it just gives you an insight of the dynamics of fiqh and the history of fiqh to give us more appreciation. Hopefully this will help us, as I said, maintain our brotherhood as Muslims today, even though we disagree, and have respect for the scholars, even if we don't see the point they're coming from. Inshallah, give them their due respect and their due state in the ummah. Jazakumullah khairan. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. If you have any questions, I'll answer them. But generally speaking, our session is done, or we're done with it. Yes.
So now that we know that, some differences between madahib, again goes back to someone didn't get a hadith, didn't know about a specific hadith. Now that all the hadith have been compiled and we know this is an authentic hadith from the Prophet, in that case then, does that nullify that opinion that was based on not knowing the hadith, and it becomes obligatory to take the hadith?
This is a very, very good question. Some of these differences among the companions of the Prophet ﷺ was because the companion did not receive this hadith. And this was also with the madhahib. The imam in a madhab would make an opinion because he never got this hadith. So he made a ruling that seemingly goes against this hadith. Now the hadith are compiled. Most of it we have easy access to them. A lot of them have been checked in terms of authenticity, etc. So if we find a hadith now to be authentic and the madhab seems to be going against it, does this negate this ruling in this madhab? Basically the madhab are still evolving, and that's the good thing. That's why the mujtahideen in the madhab are still looking into their madhab and developing them. So you will find some of the scholars in a certain madhab, in the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali madhab, will actually start changing their opinions about certain things because they follow the usul, the principles of the madhab. Some of them would not necessarily change because, as we said last time, if you remember, we have two issues, al-thubut and the dalala. We have the authenticity and we have also the indication. So maybe they would, okay, the hadith now is proven to be authentic, but I don't necessarily agree that this hadith is actually talking about this ruling. So they might say, no, the indication of the hadith is talking about something else. So it might be this, might be that. So it could, yes, change the opinion in the madhab. But for some of the scholars in the madhab as well, they might say, yes, the hadith is authentic, but we don't see that this hadith is actually there. Or maybe they say, yes, this hadith talks about this, but we have other hadith that, okay, that help us make this rulings an exception to this hadith. So there will always be dynamics there. So it's not sometimes so black and white. There are so many factors contributing to this ruling that the scholars have arrived at. So even though a hadith might seem to contradict this, but maybe they have another number of hadith that build the context and build the case for the ruling. So they hold on to it. Okay? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Someone asked a question on the Slack group.
Yeah.
It's up to you if you want to answer it now or you can answer it later.
Ask the question. What was it?
Will we analyze the characteristics that played a role in the Sahabas and 3 generations, handling the differences in fiqh that we lack in our times?
Can you read the question again?
So, will we analyze the characteristics that played a role in the Sahabas and the 3 generations, handling the differences in fiqh that we lack in our times?
Okay, the principles and the characteristics that made the companions handle their differences. Okay, are we going to analyze them? I think we mentioned, generally speaking, the reasons for their differences. So how they handled that, I mean, probably that's a good research topic for some of you. Okay, a lot of it would be the sense of brotherhood that was obviously stressed. Second of all was that they could see, open-mindedness. They can see the other companions not coming from a completely wrong perspective. They have a point there. It could be as well, it seems to be a general understanding among the companions that there is a room for differences. Okay, so it would be a good research topic to actually, for someone to analyze these. But for us to analyze this, I think it would be a big stretch on the time that we have. Big stretch on the time. But it would be a very good, some kind of, it would complement what we're talking about. Absolutely. It was a good question, actually. MashaAllah.
Earlier you spoke about 2 days for one fresh day exchange.
Yeah.
For instance, let's say you had a fresh phone and I give you my old phone with $100 to get this phone.
Okay, good question. It's about riba al-fadl here. Exchanging, let's say, 2 kilos of dates for 1 kilo of better dates. The scholars say, إذا اختلف النوع فلا ربا. And the Prophet ﷺ says, basically, if it's different types of dates, it's a different thing, no problem. But as long as it's not the same date. Some scholars say, as long as it's dates. But the most correct opinion is that if it's different types of dates, okay, then, like, for example, ajwa is not like barhi or like majul or like burni. So each one of them has a different value. So exchanging a phone for a phone, if it's a Samsung for HTC, yes, no problem. You can exchange it, different values. Okay? If it's a different phone, even if it's all Samsung, different models, I guess that's fine. If the value is similar, this value is similar to that value, should be okay.
There's nothing wrong with adding money.
If it's a matter of value to value, fine, should be okay, inshallah. Value of value.
Markup is halal. Markup. Price is markup.
Yeah, inshallah. Inshallah, because it's a value for a value. Yeah. Sometimes to get out of this, some scholars have reservations about this. You can probably sell that one and it should be okay, inshallah.
You said al-ha will be ha. What does it mean?
Ha and biha. That means you give me, I give you. On the spot. And it's not I give you today, you give me tomorrow. These things have to be given yadan biyad. This is what it means. Yadan biyad. I hand you, you hand me. Ha'an biha. Ha means take it, here you go, here you go. Okay? It's like, it's more of a like haka. Hak. In Arabic it's ismu fi'l, hak. Like khudh means take. Ha'an biha, same thing, yeah. Okay, no more questions? جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب